This is the popular KEF Q150, and to be real with you all, the only reason why I'm reviewing it today has to do with price. You see, usually this speaker sells for $600 a pair. However, recently, it looks like KEF has been selling it for as low as $300 a pair, which honestly seems like a pretty decent deal. So I thought now would be a great time to reveal my thoughts about this speaker to you all, and to comment on whether or not I think it's worth picking up. Now, for the very few of you out there who are not familiar with the Q150, here's a general overview as to what you're getting. In a nutshell, you are getting a compact, rear-ported two-way monitor that's available in 3 colors, those colors being white, black, and walnut. And when it comes to the driver configuration, in the middle you get this 1-inch aluminum dome tweeter that's in the center of this 5¼ inch aluminum cone woofer. Now the configuration that you're looking at is referred to as a dual concentric design. And essentially KEF wants all of the sound of the speaker to come from one very specific area, because when you do this, it allows the loudspeaker engineer to not only achieve really good balance between the high frequencies and the low frequencies, but it also allows the engineer to give you a balanced sound no matter where you are in your room. So that is the Q150 in a nutshell. So now it's time to go over the performance of the speaker and to comment on whether or not it's worth buying today in 2022. Let's go. Okay, so I'm going to start off this review by addressing the big question right up front. Are the Q150s worth buying today in 2022? Well, in my opinion, the answer is, it depends. If you have to pay full price for these speakers, then I would say, while you're getting a fair value, you should definitely check out other competitors before you just rush out and spend your money on a set of Q150s. On the flip side, however, if you can pick these up for literally half the price, then that changes the conversation entirely, and in which case I would say, yeah, go ahead and pick them up. And that leads me to the people who I think would stand the best chance of enjoying these speakers. Because in my opinion, it boils down to 2 types of individuals. The first is the experienced audiophile who's looking to assemble a system somewhere else in their house, and the second person is somebody who's looking to buy their first set of high quality loudspeakers, and you know you want performance that goes beyond entry-level solutions like, say, the popular Sony Core series. It's also for somebody who expects versatile performance, because maybe you don't just listen to a wide variety of music, but perhaps you also play games or you watch movies. Again, these speakers should fit the bill nicely. And because they are small speakers, I would only recommend them to people who plan on using them in a small room and or in desktop applications. And that leads me to who they're not for. So if you listen at loud volumes, these aren't for you. You'll just need bigger speakers. They're also not ideal for large rooms, and they're not for somebody who's a bass head. If that's the case, then you will probably want to use a subwoofer with these speakers. But overall, I think what you get out of the Q150 is something that gives you a taste of the high-end sound for not a lot of money. And that is my short overview of this speaker, so now it's time to go over just a little bit more detail with that typical nerdy audiophile summary. Let's go. You know what, guys? After spending a bit of time with the Q150s, I now understand why these speakers have been popular for so many years, because they really do offer up a lot of things that audiophiles enjoy. I mean, they lay down this massive soundstage, and they can also give you nice integration between the treble, the mid-range, and the bass, even as you walk around a room. And finally, they offer up a lot of detail, especially if you can pick them up for $300 a pair. And best of all, they're still very easy speakers to work with, meaning that you don't have to burn chicken feathers in order to enjoy consistently pleasurable sound from these speakers. Now, when it comes to their overall sonic character, I would describe it as distinctly V-curve, meaning that the treble is going to be boosted, the upper mid-range at the crossover point is going to sound a little bit thin, and then the rest of the mid-range and bass is actually going to be bumped up in its frequency response, and that results in what we hear and describe as being a warm and rich sounding presentation. So to be clear, this is not a linear or accurate speaker. And really, I think that's a good thing, because I think a lot of people who are paying for something at this price point, they want to be entertained, and that's exactly what the Q150 offers you, is a very lively, strong, entertaining sound for a speaker its size. Another thing that I think is great about the Q150 is that it sounds good at low volumes, meaning that you don't have to crank the volume in order to enjoy a nice, pleasant sound. Now, having said that, it's not all roses and sunshine for the Q150. It definitely has its issues, so before you go ahead and make an impulse purchase, let's go over those issues now to make sure you'd still be cool with them. Okay, so for this section, I'm going to straight up read off a list that I have because I am not trying to commit all of these points to memory. So getting right to it, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a speaker that you buy if you plan on listening at loud volumes, which I'll define as 80 dB or higher. If that's you, then you just flat out need to buy a bigger set of speakers. Next, as with every product, not everybody's going to like the sound. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the treble is tilted up. This is a speaker that has a lively sound, and not everybody's going to like that. Some of you may even feel it's a little bright sounding to your taste. Obviously, how you interpret the treble is going to depend on your individual situation. And personally speaking, one of the complaints I have is that the upper mid-range takes on this slightly metallic tone, something that many people may not notice, but I do, and it's, again, not something that I care for. Next, the bass of the Q150 is kind of interesting because on one hand, it starts to roll off exactly where you would expect it to for a small speaker, but then at around 40 hertz, whenever you listen to content that has a lot of output in that range, it suddenly gives you a lot of bass output for a speaker its size. So it's weird. It's like it starts to drop off and then has a second wind. I actually think that's pretty cool, but clearly it's not a linear speaker. And then lastly, let's be real. While the Q150 carries an MSRP of $600, KEF has been selling it for $300 now for a while, so they're $300 speakers. And at $300, yeah, they're absolutely worth considering. But at $600, there's a lot of competition. And to really hammer this home, let's go over some comparisons. Okay, so at $300 a pair, the only competitors that I recall covering at this channel would be the Q Acoustics 3010 and the PSB Alpha, whatever the model number is. So I think this comparison is interesting because all three speakers actually have a similar voicing, that being the classic V curve, tilted up treble with slightly exaggerated mid-range and bass. And to be fair to Q Acoustics and PSB, they're not humiliated by the Q150s and overall sound quality. But still, when you get right down to it, the Q150s are the better buy for the following reasons. Not only do they offer up superior resolution, or in other words, the detail that they give you sounds less forced than the other two speakers, but they also lay down a wider sound stage, as well as giving you better integration between the treble, the mid-range, and the bass, particularly when you're walking around off-axis. So yeah, they're a great buy at $300. However, at $600, this is when they face very stiff competition from the likes of ELAC and Triangle. Let's use the Triangle Bro 3s as an example. Those speakers offer up similar levels of detail and imaging, but they're also easier to drive, they sound more dynamic, they give you fuller range sound, and you can play them at louder volumes. And then with the ELACs, you're getting a more neutral listening experience, the sense of scale is bigger, the mid-range sounds more natural, the bass is going to be stronger, and they too can be played at louder volumes. So at $600 a pair, you have to really like what the Q150s are laying down in order to justify them over competitors. However, at $300, they're a pretty easy buy. So for those of you who are genuinely interested in the speaker, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is more like a value add, so you know how to get great sound out of these speakers. Okay, so first, let's talk about equipment matching. Now, I need to emphasize this right up front because I see so many people out there just fretting over what's the best amp for whatever speaker it is that they want to buy. And in the case of the Q150s, guys, don't stress over it. I mean, seriously, it doesn't matter if you spent just a little over $100 for this little Class D amp, or if you plan on using them with your entry-level AV receiver. It really doesn't matter, so long as you use them as recommended, which is in a small room or for a desktop application, odds are you're going to run into good sound. Now, I do admit I have a preference in terms of the kind of gear I use with the Q150s. I prefer warmer sounding electronics like, say, the Yamaha 202 stereo receiver, which I think makes for a great economical match. However, you can get better performance out of these speakers if you spend more money on electronics, so if you want to go ham, then go ahead and pair them up to something like the Iota VX SA3, which will definitely give you a strong sense as to what these speakers are capable of. And while you can pair them up to even higher end electronics, in my opinion, I think the Iota VX SA3 represents the point of diminishing returns, to where it doesn't really make sense to spend a whole lot more money on the gear unless it's just something you really want to do. Anyway, that is going to be it for component matching, so now let's talk about setting them up in your room. Okay, so if I haven't made it clear by now, these speakers are pretty easy to work with, so this section goes out to those of you who are curious about what you can do to get the best sound out of these speakers, starting with stands. Ideally, you want the drivers of the speakers to be positioned directly in line with your ears, which in my case means using stands that are 28 inches in height. Now, you don't have to go crazy with stands. You can buy something for mono price and still get decent sound. Now, if you plan on using these speakers in like your desktop rig or on a literal shelf, then I would suggest springing for a set of stands by ISO Acoustic just because they were made for that application and they do their job well. Next, let's talk about positioning. For the most balanced listening experience from the Q150, you want to leave the speakers pointed directly out into the room. However, if you want more of a lively and forward sound, then just point them towards your ears. Next, let's talk about how they sound when you place them next to a wall. And it's really quite simple. The closer you place them to a wall, the more bass you're going to get. And whether or not you think this is a good thing or a bad thing will just depend on your room and personal taste. If you think you're getting too much bass out of this speaker when they're next to a wall, then just plug the port and you should be good to go. However, if you want the most balanced integration between the mid-range, the treble, and the bass, then yes, you do want to give them a little bit of room to breathe. I would suggest a good 1.5 feet away from any wall boundary to achieve that balance. Otherwise, guys, that is it. So now it is finally time to wrap up this review. So, that is the KEF Q150. Now, as some of you know, I'm usually not the biggest fan of the KEF sound, but I admit I like these speakers and I understand why they're so popular. They make for a fun listen, they're easy to work with, and they're easy on your wallet, especially if you can pick them up for $300. So ultimately, I think they're a great choice for somebody who's looking for a taste of that high-end sound, but you don't want to spend your entire paycheck on a set of speakers. So, having said that, that's my review. If you're curious about how they stack up to the much more expensive LS50 Meta, then stick around for the bonus section. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. Okay, so this bonus section is for the people who will inevitably ask me to compare the Q150 to the more expensive LS50 Meta. Now, I heard a rumor that the Q150 was designed to act as this budget version of an LS50. And whether or not that rumor is true actually doesn't interest me, because here's the bottom line. When you compare these speakers side by side, the differences between them are clear and obvious, starting with the quality of the cabinet. While there's nothing wrong with the quality of the cabinet that you get with the Q150, especially considering the price, it pales in comparison to what you get with the LS50 Meta. In fact, even though the Q150 is the larger speaker, it's not nearly as heavy as the LS50, and that's because of the materials that are used for the LS50's cabinet. And then, of course, there's going to be the differences in terms of performance. So think about it like this. The LS50 Meta gives you more of that typical audiophile listening experience. It gives you an incredibly clear sound. The mid-range is more transparent than the Q150. The bass is going to be tighter. The soundstage is going to be wider and deeper. And overall, it offers up a lot more resolution, to the point to where it actually makes the Q150 sound a little muffled by comparison, like there's a t-shirt or a thin blanket over the speaker. Now, don't get me wrong. While the Q150 offers up good resolution for the price, it's not really in the LS50 levels league in that regard. Having said that, though, I can see applications where people may prefer the sound of the Q150, because when you get right down to it, it is the bigger speaker, which means it's capable of delivering stronger, deeper bass output. Beyond that, it also offers up a warmer and richer sound, which lends itself well to poorly recorded material, and it also sounds pretty good even on entry-level products like AV receivers, whereas the LS50 Meta is a little more discriminating with the recording quality, and you usually need to pair it up with expensive electronics in order to truly understand what this speaker is capable of. So it really just depends on what you want. If you want that audiophile listening experience, then the LS50 Meta is the way to go. But if you don't need all of that, then you know what? You'll probably be just fine with the Q150. So that is my take on how these two speakers stack up to one another. So for real this time, thanks for watching and peace.